Hey everyone, welcome to I guess what might be a live interview dump truck. Trying some new things on the site, trying some new stuff, and happy to have as a guest today Matt Gilgenbach, who is the designer of the upcoming Never-Ending Nightmares. Recently finished a Kickstarter raising funds for that, and also previously worked on the highly underrated game Retrograde. So Matt, thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So what has it been like the couple of weeks since the Kickstarter closed? I know you were very stressed the last time that we talked. Not sure if you were going to make it, but you definitely did.
Yeah, it's been really great. Certainly, it was a nerve-wracking experience. The project is in the limbo where, maybe it could make it, but it wasn't a sure thing. So that's very stressful. Certainly, some Kickstarter projects, they meet their goals day one or quickly, or they, just the goal seems unreachable. But we were sort of in that limbo, so it was really difficult in terms of stress. But fortunately, we made it, and it felt like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders just because there was so much pressure. But then now there's the pressure that we have like 3,600 people eagerly anticipating the game, and so now I have to actually make it and do a good job and keep everyone happy. So there's definitely still some pressure, but it's definitely the good kind. I'm happy to have a community excited about the game.
I mean, because I've definitely heard that from folks when they make the transition to having been successfully kickstarted, is that it's not like you just forget that and move on. Depending on the commitments you've made to the backers, you have to sort of balance between working on the game, but then also making sure they're informed and able to know a little bit more about the game as development goes along.
Yeah, I think the reason people do Kickstarters is because they want to be involved in the game. Because if you look at it, Kickstarter is kind of a bad investment, right? You're paying for something. Maybe I shouldn't be saying this as someone who's Kickstarter a project, but you're basically paying for something that doesn't exist, something that might not live up to expectations, something that is a big question mark, and maybe it's going to be super late, maybe it's going to be buggy and unfinished. You don't know as a backer, and certainly as a project funder, you want to try and make sure people know you can deliver on the vision. But I think that the appeal in backing a Kickstarter is because you want to participate, you want to help the game along and make it as successful as possible. But the thing is, and I think some people who do Kickstarters don't realize that, is as a developer doing a Kickstarter project, you're sort of making a commitment, or the expectation is there that you're going to stay involved with your community. You're going to give them, early access and information about the game as things go along. If you just sort of say, hey, I'm, gonna barrel down and just focus on making the game, see you in a year, I think your backers are going to be very unhappy, and I don't think you're Kickstartering right if there are rules. I don't know if you can say Kickstarter rules, but
So, Never-Ending Nightmares is a horror game that is, excuse me, slightly leveraging, your personal experiences, the way over your life you have dealt with mental illness. But one of the things that when we chatted at PAX Prime was that your interest in horror goes well beyond sort of your personal experiences, and is something that you have kept tabs on over the years and read a lot of literature about. In fact. So I'm curious, can you remember the first time that you watched a horror film, and like what was the first one that kind of made an impact on you?
well, it's really funny because I think like early on as a child, I was very, very scared. I was a scaredy cat, and so like I remember the Neverending Story. There was I don't remember much about the movie, but there was like real violence where they like stab a wolf thing or something, and there's blood everywhere. And just that, as a young child, gave me nightmares, and I had trouble sleeping. And so, let's see what else. I mean, even like the Masters of the Universe He-Man movie was like unsettling to me because I had only seen like cartoon violence and not real people violence. So just because I think I was so afraid and these things were so terrifying, even things that aren't really scary, it's created this sort of fascination, and so I've almost wanted to push my limits and build my tolerance. And so now, I mean, I don't know, I haven't seen a movie where I'm like, oh, this is too much, and I think it's just been like a long process of just trying to explore my boundaries and expand, what I could stomach, almost sort of as a challenge or daring myself.
I'll go ahead and point out to the folks that are watching or in the Giant Bomb chat, if you're having issues with the site, the system admins are working on it. Just reload the page and it should work just fine. But also, if you have any questions, drop them in the chat, and I'll sprinkle some in as we go through this. But Matt, you mentioned that you've kind of built up a tolerance over the years. Can you remember the last movie that actually kind of got under your skin and surprised you that it actually affected you in some way?
Well, it's interesting because I think that there's sort of two approaches in terms of there's the content, where the content makes you squeamish, and that's a little hard to do. I mean, just because I've been so desensitized. But let's see. Well, there's actually a CSI episode, I think, like last week, about like cannibalism and sticking like human body parts in food. And I mean, like, it was on TV, but it was, my stomach was not, super thrilled with that. But then also, I think before that, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre prequel movie, the prequel to the remake, not the third remake or something. That one, the
got a
violence.
convoluted history.
Yeah, the violence in that one got to me, and it's funny because like in high school, I didn't have the crazy tolerance I had, and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2, like when they're like cutting the face off with the turkey cutter, I was like, no, thank you, that's too much for me. But now I see the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 is really a tongue-in-cheek movie, and I can appreciate the humor there. But I think a better question would be not in terms of the violence that's got to me, but just sort of the images and sort of the material. And it's definitely, I mean, certainly I love the classics like The Shining. Recently I watched, I think it's Kurosawa. He did Pulse or Cairo. I'm sure I'm butchering all the Japanese.
Oh, yeah, I mean, Pulse is the one about like the haunted photographs, right? No, wait, maybe I'm screwing that up.
Pulse is amazing, and it's actually been sort of an inspiration for Neverending Nightmares because it's a horror movie, and they did a terrible U.S. remake that totally missed out the good elements of it. But it's really almost like an exploration of mood and environment and loneliness and isolation. So I think it's like something with electricity makes people disappear or freeze forever. I don't even remember exactly, but like just the mood and the feelings in that were so much sort of beyond the traditional horror elements, just because it's not just about being scared. And so that's one of the things with Neverending Nightmares I'm trying really hard to do is, besides being scared, I want to have that feeling of loneliness, of isolation, of sort of desolation and depression, where you feel like everything is just terrible. And so I'm trying to add sort of more layers of emotion rather than just fear to Neverending Nightmares, and Pulse did that really well. And I think I could maybe cheat on IMDb here. I think it's Curse.
Is it Noroi the Curse?
Let me just see here. I should have prepared my notes here.
I'll go right ahead. Cheat to IMDb away.
Yeah. So let's see. It's Kiyoshi Kurosawa. I think I messed that up. And it was... Oh, I think it was The Cure. I'm totally wrong.
Oh, yeah, you know what? I've had that recommended to me before, but I've not watched it yet. But
It's
I've heard really good things about it. I mean, good. When people talk about like good horror films, there's definitely some that goes along with that.
Yeah, it's really I only watched it recently, but it really left an impression, and it's almost not quite horror. I mean, it's sort of straddling the line between, like thriller and horror. But it's just the mood and even the audio and everything just creates these amazing feelings, and so that one really left an impact, I think, of the horror movies I've seen recently.
So one of the things, that when you watch horror films and you play horror games, you realize pretty quickly is like how many of them, the jump scares are sort of like part of the genre. It's a tool for horror creators to use. So, like when you're thinking about laying out Never-Ending Nightmares and sort of like the rhythm of the player's emotions that you want them to go through, where do you place those moments where you're gonna, have a loud noise or sort of an image out of nowhere that will sort of like play into the jump scare so that maybe don't overplay your hand, but certainly it's a tool that that horror creators can use.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I love jump scares. I love the feeling of being startled. I think it's just a really sort of pure and raw emotion. And so, I mean, there's some horror games that don't really do much with jump scares, but I think it's sort of an important part to creating, to really sort of building the tension and put the player on edge at all times. So I think the secret is put them where people least expect it, and so that of course is a challenge. But you have to try and sort of play with pacing and wait for sort of the right moment, and it's definitely not a science, and certainly I'm learning more about it as I go. But just when I approach, like, I want a jump scare, I always think about, like, what is the player experiencing? What are they thinking? Will they be expecting this? So, and I think that's the best sort of philosophy behind jump scares. At least that's what I'm trying to do.
One of the things that you mentioned to me at PAX that I haven't had a chance to sit down and track down a copy yet, but I definitely need to, is this, what was it? Was it The Psychology of Horror, I think is the book you had mentioned?
Yeah,
Can
actually, I keep it by my desk for reference. Yeah, it's The Philosophy of Horror. It's by, I guess, Noel Carroll, and it's very much a philosophy book. And I have an engineering degree in school, so I didn't really do much in the way of philosophy, but I find it interesting. But it's very academic, and it's all sorts of thought proofs. But I really like the idea of that he sort of approaches horror as a something to study, something that's worth studying, and really digs into theories that other people have about horror, and then he proposes a lot of his own theories, which is really interesting. And the argument at the center of it certainly talks about, like, the formulas of horror and how to create horror and what's important for like enemies and monsters in horror. But the sort of crux of the book is the idea of why we like horror as a medium. Why is this compelling to people? And certainly I have my own theories, but his idea is that it's sort of like the fascination with the unknown and the curiosity of what's going to happen next. How can they defeat this monster? Where does it come from? Which I think definitely is one aspect to the appeal of horror.
Does that book mostly talk about sort of does it talk about a whole lot of contemporary horror? Or is it looking more at like the mainstays, your Frankensteins, your Draculas, sort of, some of the stuff that's at the root of the horror genre?
I think it does a pretty good discussion of horror up until when it was written, which I think was like early 90s. Let's see here. Published in 1990. So, I mean, I think they talk about, Alien and some of the other ones that were more contemporary there. But I think it's interesting because it takes a look at, from the beginning, and moving forward. And if you're even interested in the study of almost like pre-horror, H.P. Lovecraft wrote an essay, which I think you can find for free on the web, basically about the Gothic, well, he calls everything the weird tale, but he almost takes it from, the very early sort of Gothic stories where people are actually writing essentially horror or horror-themed novels, and it's almost weird to think about like that horror is almost contemporary compared to other genres. You look at Greek tragedies, and I don't know how many BCs that's in, but a long time ago, and but like horror as it is now is really, dates back to 1700s basically. So it's almost exciting to be in sort of a new genre, new in the grand scheme of things anyway.
Yeah, and it's been interesting. I wrote a piece earlier this week for Giant Bomb in which I supposed that part of the reason that horror has seen such a resurgence in the last couple of years, other than there being just a lot of really quality games like Amnesia, is that streaming and sort of the rise of people sharing their personal experiences lends itself very well to horror. And there are a lot of people that, when they watch a horror movie, you can cover your eyes, the movie keeps going, like it's going to go toward this conclusion, the credits are going to roll, Jason is going to, attack someone or be defeated, so regardless of what you as the viewer do. But, games are different in that the player has agency, the player has to solve the puzzle, the player has to go around the corner, and it's interesting to watch how the genre starts to react to that. I'm wondering if the fact that there are so many people that watch other people play horror games as opposed to necessarily playing them themselves, is that something you think about at all as you start to design Neverending Nightmares?
I think it's difficult to design a game around the reactions of people watching the player. I don't even know how I would approach that, but certainly I think you're definitely onto something. You look at I think PewDiePie did a playthrough of our game, which has like, I don't know, 1 million, 2 million views or something, and it's like, there's no way we're ever going to sell 2 million copies of the game. I mean, fingers crossed, but really I think that's, well beyond the scope of what's realistic for our title. But, 2 million people are interested in the content we've created, interested in sharing the content we created with PewDiePie. Certainly is a mega YouTube celebrity. Who would have thought that'd be a thing like 5 years ago? But it's just so interesting that there's more to games than just playing them. There's people are thinking of them almost as sort of a communal activity with, Twitch TV and live streaming and, typing in, hey, go into that dark corner, and then seeing the player do that. I think it's just really amazing, and it's an exciting time to make a game because there's just so much more interest and so many ways to share it with people. So I can't say I'm designing for YouTube playthroughs, but I love the idea, and personally I love watching YouTube playthroughs of other people. Like I feel like weird saying but I have one of the few jobs in the world where like hearing people scream in terror is like a job well done, patting myself on the back every time I hear a blood-curdling scream. But definitely I love it. It's music to my ears.
Have you found that reading things like the philosophy of horror, sort of directly informs or impacts how you think about horror and how you're sort of employing it as you design the game, or is that just kind of something that's in the background?
No, I think it's definitely helpful, specifically when they're talking about monsters. They say they actually have like formulas for coming up with monster ideas, and so like I can't remember them all offhand, but there's like the half blank, blank. So you have like the Fly Man, combine them together, that's the Fly, Jeff Goldblum or whatever, and or disfigurement. I can't remember all the ways, but just sort of the idea that a villain has to be sort of impure, I think is what they say, is just you want to create something disgusting, something disturbing, something unsettling. And so while there's been horror movies where it's not, quite disturbing. I mean, you look at the Halloween series, and it's a guy with a white mask, and it's like, I guess he's just a regular guy, although apparently he's almost immortal. I don't know.
It kind of changed as the series went on, and they had to come up with reasons that he kept coming back.
Well, but I mean, even in the first movie, which I think I've seen like the first movie in H2O, I'm like, H2O. But anyway, the first movie was really good. But like, he got his ass kicked. Can I say that ass?
You were allowed. You were swear away.
He got his ass kicked over and over, and he just kept sitting up. And like, I think to some extent that's almost where his sort of impurity came from. It's just this sort of unnatural life that he had, because just like the scenes of when he sit up, that's the sits up, the chills go down your spine. You're like, man, they just can't get him. So I think the idea of impurity, and I think it's definitely helped me for designing Never-Ending Nightmares, because obviously everything I'm trying to tie back into the psychological state of the main character, and I really want to push the psychological aspect, like in Silent Hill 2, but Silent Hill 2 had amazing monsters, and so it's like you want to have it communicate what you want psychologically, but you also want it to be disturbing and unsettling, and I think that's a key element to great horror. And so, I mean, that's definitely insights and, the formulas, which I'll have to review. But, yeah, I mean, definitely that's some like a discrete takeaway that's very helpful. And just, I think, any sort of study of horror, any sort of looking at horror definitely helps with understanding. So if I understand the medium better, then I think I'm better equipped to make a game.
You mentioned Silent Hill 2 as a game that you look to in terms of the psychological aspects and the monsters. Like, is that up there for you in terms of sort of like a top tier horror game to look at? Do you have some other favorites too?
Oh yeah, I mean Silent Hill 2 is definitely the pinnacle for me. Definitely Amnesia, as I'm sure you know.
Oh yeah.
I was listening to your podcast with Thomas Grip. I mean, like they really did an amazing job on Amnesia, and so that's another one. Also, I really like the Fatal Frame series. I think
I was just going to say that. I was like,
really
Fatal Frame is completely underrated.
Yeah, I don't really know why it's overlooked. I mean, they did a lot of really smart things, and I mean, it's not quite as psychological. Maybe it's just in the U.S. because it's so sort of steeped in Japanese culture. Maybe that makes it a little less approachable for U.S. audiences. I mean, they didn't even bother porting Fatal Frame 4 to the U.S., which is sad. That was the one for Wii by Grasshopper Manufacture. So yeah, I'm not quite sure why it doesn't resonate as well as it should, but I thought, I mean, it was brilliant. I mean,
I constantly think about, that you think about the Wii U. People have had a lot of trouble trying to come up with compelling uses for the gamepad and the fact that you can kind of move it around and use it as sort of a mobile screen. But I immediately think of Fatal Frame. Like the idea of a horror game where it's got, if you could hold up that gamepad and pan it around the room and like use that to fight the ghosts, like that seems scary as hell.
Yeah, I mean, that would be awesome, and I really like the idea of using these non-traditional, game controllers to aid in immersion, like Silent Hill Shattered Memories, certainly not the best Silent Hill games. They did a lot of interesting things, but my very favorite part about the game was how they used the Wiimote as a cell phone.
Yeah.
And I thought that was sort of really neat because, here you have this thing, it's ringing, you're pressing buttons on it, and it really sort of helps you go into the world because I think immersion is really important. And even if it's, you're holding a Wiimote and not a phone, but I think just the act of pantomiming actually helps with immersion.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday, and he's obsessed with horror games. He runs a blog covering all the ones he's played over the years, and he mentioned I can't. It's a Japanese only game, so I can't even attempt to say the actual name. But it's a horror game that uses exclusively the Wii balance board,
Oh yeah,
and
yeah. Is
you
that Chris's survival horror
yes,
quest block? Oh yeah,
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
read
We
it religiously. So
Yeah, I guess I should have assumed that you probably knew what it was. Yeah, Chris and I chatted yesterday for something that'll be on the site soon, and so I had him like run down some of the weirder stuff that maybe people hadn't heard of before, and I had not heard of that one. But the idea of walking around a house or running around a house with a balance board, I don't know how well it works, but it's super unique, and I wouldn't surprise me if it didn't even have to be that scary to immerse you, purely because the way you're sort of working and playing the game is so different.
yeah, yeah, and I mean like well, the Sega did Rise of Nightmares, or something like
Hmm.
that for a Connect horror game, which. I mean, I think they had some interesting ideas, but I think it suffered from a lot of the issues that plagued early Connect titles, like this is uncontrollable. But I do like the idea of, making people walk around, because to me that was sort of like one of the beauty parts of Amnesia is like basically the monster comes and your character, you want to not get killed, so you go into a room, shut the door, and then hide behind a crate, and then look away because you can't see the monster, because then you'll lose insanity points. So it's like your character is doing this intense fear reaction, and I think by doing that in the game, it really helps you get into that mindset. And so almost like a game where you have to physically cower or something, like crouch and hide. Like I think that would be really could be really terrifying. I mean, obviously there's Connect issues and all that stuff, but blue sky, future Oculus, immersion. I think there's a lot of cool opportunities for horror.
Yeah, I don't think it's a big surprise that when I got my Oculus kit a couple of weeks ago and started diving into the horror stuff, and I don't think it is a huge shock that horror is kind of the most popular genre on that device so far, because it lends itself so easily to the strengths of the genre, which is immersing you in a world, and it's horrifying. Like some of them like are. I mean, I was playing them for fun and for other people to watch me act like an idiot while I walked my way through them. But they're like this. If this is what's happening as people are just figuring out what's possible, like I'm genuinely terrified at what people are going to be doing, a couple of years from now.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, yeah, that was sort of a stretch goal. I was hoping to fool around with the idea of never-ending nightmares on Oculus, which it's essentially 2D. Well, we do like 2D plus some extra 3D, so it's like I don't know 2.25D, maybe 2.5D, but it doesn't lend itself well to the idea of 3D or depth perception. But I love the idea of being able to control everything that the player sees, and that to me is like a really great tool for immersion. And of course, I mean, I don't know, I don't have an Oculus yet, but it's definitely something where it's like, is that going to be disorienting, where you turn your head and you can't escape from the static screen, or
Hmm.
is it just going to be cool that you can't see anything but the horror? And I don't know. Certainly, that's something I would be interested in exploring.
Yeah, that's the thing that Thomas Grip was explaining to me when he was talking about why they're not supporting Oculus in their upcoming game Soma, because the stuff they're doing visually and the stuff with the interface would just require them to essentially build kind of two different games, and that was too much for the size of their studio. But when he started thinking about doing Oculus specific sort of experiments, the thing that seemed to excite him the most was that idea that when you're playing a horror game, whether on your TV or your computer monitor or your iPad, like whatever device you're on that isn't an Oculus, you can see the whole screen. You can see everything that's happening, whether it's first person or third person. And the thing about the Oculus is that you're allowed to start playing with the sort of the periphery of your eyes. The things where you don't have a complete picture of what's going on, but your eyes are picking up little bits of details, and the idea of being able to play around with that sounds really powerful for a horror designer.
Definitely. I mean, like personally, I don't really get scared much of things or movies or like things that go bump in the night. But there's always that time where you just see like a shadow or some motion in your periphery, and I think it's almost like evolutionary or instinctual. When something is in your periphery, you tighten up because it could be an assailant, it could be an attacker. It's that fight or flight, and it's just so amazing that just things right outside your field of vision can trigger such an intense reaction. And I think that is something really exciting about the Oculus, and certainly I'm super excited about it, and hopefully it will be like a platform, like people will design Oculus only games, because I think really you can add Oculus support to another game, but I don't think it's going to be as good as something that's designed around the strengths of the hardware.
Right. You one of the things that I'm lucky is that my wife is also into horror quite a bit, so I can share all that stuff with her, and it's a lot more fun when you have someone else there as opposed to sort of watching stuff on your own. I think horror works very well as sort of a communal experience, which I think certainly plays into what we were talking about before in terms of streaming. But is your wife into horror as well, or is it something you kind of explore on your own?
No, it's she can't take suspense in movies, so like even if it's like a taut thriller, she'll go on Wikipedia, read the ending, and then she'll be able to handle it. But I mean, it's interesting, that she takes that approach, just because like suspense can be hard. Sometimes really well done things you just really want to skip ahead to the end, and so I think it's interesting that there's sort of a spectrum in terms of what people can stomach with even just suspense, and so certainly like to push Never Ending Nightmares on the sort of suspense, on the mystery, on the what will happen next front, but also on the horror, we're gonna scare the crap out of you, and yes, I mean it's just it's a little sad that I have to explore this area of my interest by myself, but certainly I'm not complaining, very happily married. My wife is the sweetest person ever, but it's yeah, I mean, it'd be nice to share a horror movie. Well, I think we're actually going to do a Halloween movie-a-thon, which was her idea, but she's going to read all the endings first. So.
Okay, there you go. Hey, see, yeah, put the power in her hands, and then everything's fine.
Yeah, yeah, but then we can't go see movies like opening night in the theater, or movies that are too scary. I watch those after she falls asleep. So.
One of the things you mentioned about Halloween, the movie franchise is, as that series went on and they had to come up with sort of logical or illogical reasons for like justifying the character to be around. That's definitely something that horror struggles with sometimes, is choosing or not choosing what to explain, how much to keep unknown. So how much of, in Never Ending Nightmares, do you have sort of like a Bible that explains sort of everything that's going on, why it's occurring, and then you just sort of pick and choose what to show to the player, or is some of it sort of like completely unknown even to you?
Well, I mean, it's sort of both at this point, right? Like, as I continue to develop it, I get a better understanding of the game and its strengths and weaknesses. So I'm evolving the design, but I do have a design doc saying, this is what I'm trying to do, and this is what what I'm going to tell players. So there's definitely more going on than will be revealed just by playing the game, and I think that's definitely a good thing, because I want people to think. I want people to figure out what they want to take away from the experience, and like I think to some extent like it ruins the mystery and the sort of fascination and the curiosity of a horror movie or of anything when you take away the magic, when you explain everything away. I mean, it's like midichlorians in Star Wars whatever episode 1. It's like great, you just ruined the whole idea of the Force, ruined for me forever, right? Like, I think, in horror games, it's like, oh, once you sort of explain it, then it's like that's gone, that's lost, and so it's better to say too little. Although then again, with horror movies, like if you wait till like Jason X, when they really run out of ideas, that's when they get really hilarious and go to outer space and whatnot. Actually, that's a theme. Like there's Critters 4,
Yep.
Critters in Space, Leprechaun 4, Leprechaun in Space,
Yep.
Jason X.
Hellraiser goes to space. At
Oh
some
man,
point.
I've only seen the first few.
Oh, you should. The Hellraiser series is, like Jason, they start running out of ideas very quickly, especially as Clive Barker moved on from the franchise after the second one. He directed and wrote the first one and produced the second one, but very quickly kind of moved on. And I would highly recommend watching it, but also knowing that it gets really terrible, because at some point, yeah, there's it's not Hellraiser in space. I forget exactly what they, Hellraiser Revelations or whatever
Yeah,
BS
I
name they
think they're
gave
on
it.
direct-to-DVD releases now. I was
Oh, they've been
looking
for a
up the
while. I
brand.
think they went direct to DVD after the third one, Hell on Earth. But the one that goes into space, like the puzzle box that Pinhead emerges from, like
Sure.
that's the space station. Like it turns into a giant puzzle block. It's hysterical. Like it's so
Awesome.
bad, but it's also like really, really good in that way. And the Hellraiser series got like as meta as I didn't see the most recent one. But the second to last one is like it's a website now. Like you visit Pinhead on it's so dumb. It's like so bad, but I really enjoy watching like when I start a franchise and I realize there are like 10 more to watch, that just gets me more excited. Because you know that if they've made 10 of these, they've gotten really bad. There is
Yeah.
no way to make 10 of them and have them maintain any sense of quality unless, like you said, it like comes around on the back end and starts eating its own face with Jason X, where it just says, you know what, screw it. He went to space. Why not?
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, even then, you're watching it for a different reason. Which I mean, I love watching bad horror movies. I love it to death. But yeah, certainly, those aren't as interesting to me as quality horror movies. But I mean, there's only so many quality horror movies, but there's almost an infinite number of terrible horror movies.
Yeah, you just load up Netflix. Like,
Yeah.
if you go to Netflix Instant, you would think that by the sheer amount of entries in the horror genre that there must be so much good stuff to watch, but like 99% of that is complete Sci-Fi Channel garbage.
Yeah, I watched this one recently on Netflix called American Mary, and I guess it's by these two twins or something, wrote and directed these two female twin ladies. I don't know. I guess they do horror, and it was terrible. It was really terrible. Oh, like, I mean, it sounded like it had a kind of neat picture, and then, like, to some extent, like a horror movie, they're the best for posters, right? Like, if you look at poster of a movie, then you know if it can be good or not, or at least you think you know. Like, there's another movie that's coming out at some point. I think it's called Nurse 3D.
Okay.
And basically, I think they made a poster and then it's like, I have to see this. And I think, like, basically the poster came before there was a movie. Like, you just pitched it as a poster or something. I don't know. I was reading on Wikipedia. I can't remember exactly. But yeah, look up the Nurse 3D. It's like a woman and she's just, like, covered in blood. I think she's, like, naked and covered in blood.
I think
That's good enough for me.
yeah, pretty much. I mean, that's
sorry.
how when I was a kid, I used to start figuring out which horror film to watch. I would, you just go down the aisle and whichever had the creepiest box art, that was the one that you decided to watch. Not because it had a great premise or you'd seen good reviews, but man, that has some creepy box art. Like that's how I saw House for the first time. That's the one where it's got the finger
cat.
that's yeah. Like and that had such a great box art.
House. Oh my gosh, it was brilliant.
So yeah, so where are you at in you had the Kickstarter finalized? Like, are you just like head down working on the game? Like, when can people expect to maybe people that aren't backers, but when can the rest of the world expect to see a little bit more of what you're working on?
I don't know. It's interesting. I'm trying to figure out what the best way to show stuff in a horror game is, because to some extent, I want to keep my cards close to my chest, right? Like, I want people to go in, because I mean, like, when I watch a horror movie or any movie in general, I like the idea of knowing as little as possible about the thing. I mean, like, it's interesting. You see trailers these days, and half of them have like the final scenes of the movie cut in, and if they're well done, then it just seems you can't point to them and say, oh, that's the climax. But sometimes they're poorly done, and you're like, oh, well, now I know the entire story of the movie. I saw the trailer.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's definitely a sort of a balancing act, and especially because we're doing alpha and beta access, and I want to show early versions of the game and get feedback. But it's tough to say exactly when the right time to show things is, and what I want to show. So it's going to be a challenge for me, but I think it's important to keep interest in the title. Get people whet their appetites, because I think on Retrograde we sort of just stuck our head down, and like every year at PAX we'd say, here, play the game, but that was sort of all the press and all the sort of updates we gave to our fans. And so I think definitely I'm forcing myself to do developer diaries and to talk about the game and what I'm doing, and yeah, I mean, I'll probably be releasing more footage or builds or something, or maybe part of it now that we have like alpha backers playing early builds, maybe they'll do live streams or something like that, or maybe I don't want them to do live streams. I don't know, it's so challenging, but I think one advantage to the game is that because it's a series of nightmares, there's so many surprises sort of left, and you don't really know what reality is until you wake up. So I sort of toyed with the ideas of releasing like alpha builds without the ending. So like,
oh wow, okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I have the balls to do that. I feel like, people are going to be like, what the hell are you doing to us? You're giving us the experience, but without the payoff. But yeah, I'm still trying to figure out all of this. It's a challenge.
Cool. Well, Matt, appreciate you taking some time to chat with me and the rest of the audience at Giant Bomb, and we wish you luck as you go forward and continue development on the game, and we'll have to check in as you move forward on
Awesome.
Never Ending Nightmares.
Well, thank you very much. I really enjoyed being on this.
Cool. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
No problem. Have a
Bye,
great day.
guys.